Hi, my name is Eric Paglia, and welcome to the second episode of the Leadership in Business Accelerator. Today, we'll explore how the private sector can reimagine natural capital in a changing climate by embracing cross-cutting environmental trends to achieve the 2030 agenda. In a moment, we'll be hearing from a panel of experts demonstrating how water sector challenges can be solved if we focus on financing nature-based solutions, protecting and restoring biodiversity, and mitigating climate change, while building resilience for the Sustainable Development Agenda. But first, Pascal Chapeau, Group Head of Sustainable Agriculture Development at Nestlé, will open the episode by sharing his insights on regenerative agriculture and explore how the associated social and environmental benefits can be embraced globally. In his presentation, Pascal will also explain how Nestlé went about implementing regenerative agriculture in its own operations.
Water. It's something a lot of us tend to take for granted. Here in Switzerland, you just turn on your tap and it's there. We even flush toilets with drinking water. But water is a precious resource, especially in agriculture. We use more water for agriculture than anything else. 70% of fresh water is used in agriculture globally. Without it, we couldn't grow all the food we need. This is true for Nestlé too. As one of the largest global users of agricultural raw materials, our supply chain is responsible for most of our water use. This means we're also at risk from water scarcity. We know we must act now so that we can ensure our continued existence and also play our part in helping address the global water crisis. So we have committed to continuing to work with farmers to help safeguard water resources so that by 2030, at least 50% of our ingredients come from regenerative sources. What do I mean by this? The idea of regenerative agriculture is very fashionable today, we know. But at Nestlé, we come from 20 years of sustainable agriculture initiative. So sustainability agriculture is a known territory. Being regenerative is not just about maintaining resources, but also restoring those that have been depleted. And water is clearly one of those resources. And we see water stewardship as one of the 4 key pillars of regenerative agriculture. This is about keeping more water in the soil and reducing the amount that runs off, improving water quality and helping cut emissions. And as not everywhere needs such active water management, we are concentrating on the many areas that do. So, what does this mean in practice? It all begins at individual farm level. As customers of the farms who supply us, we are in a strong position to contribute to this. We're trying to help farmers not just reduce their use of water, but also use it more wisely. In Pakistan, for example, we've been helping farmers improve their irrigation by adopting furrow and drip irrigation. And already this has saved about 20 million of cubic meter per year, impacting 500 farmers. We have also introduced new technologies to help control irrigation more accurately, using sensors, remote data capture, and digital solutions. We did that by partnering with both a local university and with local authorities. The outcome was a water saving of 15-20%, while increasing yields also by about 10%. And this regardless of the irrigation solution already in place. So based on this experience, we have contributed to the development of a low-cost solution for water soil sensors. 50 units have been already implemented for operational trials in about 15 countries. And once proven, we will scale up. Soil health. Soil health is essential to the idea of regenerative agriculture. We are developing practices that promote this, such as planting cover crops, doing minimum tillage, and using organic fertilizers. These not only help increase soil fertility, but also improve the structure of the soil, which then improves the retention capacity of the soil and enable better water efficiency. This is extremely important. For instance, a study from University of Florida has shown that just a 1% increase of organic matter can result in up to 20,000 gallons more available soil water per acre. That's a lot. And there are some truly creative ways we can promote soil health and water efficiency. For example, we have worked with some 52 dairy farmers in Brazil to create fields of a cactus called forage palm that can be used to feed dairy cows. We also installed there rainwater collection tanks for a capacity of about 2 million cubic meters. There, the farmers can manage their consumption using an app, giving them accurate data and helping them reduce their usage. One of the most important factors in making any of this work is listening to farmers' needs. And this is something that I learned right at the start of my professional life. I was working in irrigation in an area of France where lots of corn is grown. But that was also quite water-stressed during summertime. And I could see there that saving water meant much more work for the farmers using the technology they had. So knowing that was extremely important to design the right solution. Understanding this and the need for partnership is vital if we are going to find solutions that work for everybody. Now, while most water management activity is on individual farms, it can also extend further to the wider catchment area, and it has to. Our approach to this uses data from WRI to map the overlap between where we source our ingredients and those areas where stressed water supplies. This helps us tailor our response to the size of the risk to local supplies. In the most critical areas, we will go for a full watershed approach. And where this happens, this process of listening, engagement, and collaboration I have already described becomes even more important. This has been true in both Vietnam and Colombia, where we have enlisted thousands of farmers in communal efforts that have saved millions of cubic meters. As water is a shared resource, trying to create a positive impact on a wider scale means talking to neighbors and the wider community and working in partnership with every stakeholders. It means being aware of the potential impact on water levels, water volume, and water quality for everybody, not just a single farm. It means acknowledging that larger farms are also likely to be more resilient, that they have a responsibility to make sure they do not exacerbate the impact of shortages. We need to make sure resources are shared equitably and sustainably between all users, as well as the natural environment. This was at the forefront of our mind when we set up AgriVert. AgriVert is a little company that was created to help local farmers green their agricultural practices to preserve the quality of the Vitel, Contrex, and Hépar springs in the Vosges water basin in France. Mineral water sources must be protected if they are to stay untreated and untouched until they reach the consumer. This is key. For 20 years and even more, we have worked with various academic experts and in partnership with local stakeholders to promote positive action that preserves the quality of these water resources. There we worked with the INRA, with the region, with the city, with many, many stakeholders. And AgriVert now protects 10,000 hectares of land, making it one of the world's largest private protected areas. Our support there has enabled farmers and other landowners, by the way, to stop using artificial fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. We've promoted the use of crop rotation to improve soil conditions and the composting of animal waste. We have also encouraged them to stop farming crops like corn, which create significant nitrogen pollution. And this is only the beginning. We keep working on improving this already rich biodiversity of the basin. We'll be collaborating on the planting of trees to help recharge the aquifer, protecting soil from erosion, and provide recreational and educational areas for the local community. We also have plans to reshape the river so it flows more slowly, encouraging greater biodiversity on and near the riverbanks. AgriVert has proven to be a valuable model for catchment conservation, and we are using much of what we have learned from it elsewhere. So that's what we are doing at Nestlé. However, while we're a big company, our actions won't make much difference without wider collective efforts. We do believe that the more farmers and companies around the world that embrace this approach, the better. That's why we are spreading the message that regenerative agriculture offers a way out towards a more sustainable future.
Thank you to Pascal for providing inspiring real-world examples of regenerative agriculture as championed by Nestlé. Now I'd like to welcome the members of our next Leadership in Business Accelerator panel, who will share their expertise and recommendations for illustrating how nature-based solutions and regenerative agriculture can be leveraged to protect and restore biodiversity, mitigate climate change, and build resilience toward unforeseen water impacts. Joining me are Liz Mullen-Bernhardt, coordinator of the Global Adaptation Network at the UN Environment Program, Dr. Nathaniel Matthews, CEO of the Global Resilience Partnership, Carla Muller-Zantop, water stewardship engineer at Danone, and Oliver Withers, biodiversity lead at Credit Suisse. Thank you all for joining me here in Stockholm for this inspiring panel episode. So, before we get into some of the specific dimensions of nature-based solutions that we'll be discussing in this episode, I wanted to talk a bit about something Pascal mentioned, the importance of designing the right solution for a particular location, whether it's an individual farm or an entire catchment area. Nate, the GRP has a strong place-based perspective in its work. Perhaps you can elaborate more on Pascal's point of locally based solution design.
Thank you very much. So I think one of the things we're seeing now more than ever highlighted is that a resilient system is one that's inclusive and equitable. And inclusive participation is really critical for trust and facilitating collective action, especially responding to volatility and change. And so we have found that really inclusive decision-making, that is putting people and communities, especially women and marginalized groups, at the center of decision-making and empowering them to help develop equitable and sustainable solutions is critical for project success. And I think, as Pascal was highlighting, this really means moving away from this idea of silver bullets to actually tailoring to local contexts and local solutions. And to bring that to the ground a bit, one of the underlying principles of regenerative agriculture is to foster more integrative and equitable farming systems that use species diversity as a source of resilience and diversifying diets and moving away from the introduction of harmful chemicals. So we've done this in places like Burkina Faso, where we work with a local network of farming partners to bring in agroforestry, mixed cropping, rainwater harvesting, and composting. So a whole systems approach that really have obtained incredible results, and even within the encroaching Sahara Desert. So in these areas, the farming groups have been able to reclaim abandoned land, and increase yield by up to 130% on millet and sorghum. And it's just these sort of systems and this use of diverse and native species as bridges have also helped to manage pests and provide vital pollinators and continuous habitat, really building the resilience of people on the ground in increasingly challenging places.
Professor Liz, would you like to follow up on that at all?
Yeah, at UNEP, we do a lot of work on nature-based solutions for adaptation, and the benefits are huge, as Nate has just mentioned. One of the challenges we have really is just getting knowledge and information out there about them. The fact that nature isn't just a victim of human development or climate change, but also is one of our most important allies, fighting against the impacts of climate change, protecting humans against those impacts. And there are so many great examples out there. I think the real key is how to scale them up.
Okay, and Oliver, how can nature-based solutions like regenerative agriculture help the water sector reach its goals to be net positive by 2030?
Yeah, I think that there's real opportunity around regenerative agriculture, not just for the water sector, but a number of sectors, quite frankly. And that really talks to the interconnected nature of all of this, right? We're not just solving biodiversity problems, we're solving climate problems, we're solving socioeconomic problems. And I think that that's a significant opportunity for a number of us as practitioners in this space. So I think that what we're seeing around agriculture practices changing is a real focus on how do we reduce the quantity of water being used, but also really, really importantly, how do we improve the quality of water? And that talks to a restoration role. And private sector and all stakeholders have got a real role to play in this. And I think, building on what Nate and Elizabeth said, it's this idea that it's about a system change and it's not about addressing these things in silos. Similarly, I think that we spend a lot of time, and rightfully so, on pollutants. So how do we use less fertilizers? I think we've also got to look at general land use change that comes from agriculture. And we know that one of the biggest impacts has been deforestation, and forests play a critical role in our water systems and providing fresh water to all of us, but also providing fresh water to support agriculture itself. So it becomes a self-serving interest. And I think that's, we're starting to see that those connections are being made, and that the valuation, if you will, although we can't get it down to perfect numbers yet, intuitively we're beginning to see, and the evidence is really starting to mount, that this is a no-brainer.
And maybe if I could just add to that, just to highlight the perspective from the private sector, because I think it's really, really critical, as you just mentioned, the role that they play in incentivizing this transition. Because we talk a lot about all the great benefits of regenerative agriculture, but in a lot of cases we see that farmers are not going to make that transition by themselves. So we can secure off-taking, we can give guaranteed supplies that we can buy from these farmers, and just really it's really critical, as you say, the systems approach, that all stakeholders play their part in incentivizing and enabling this transition.
So Liz, what are the challenges of scaling up and financing ecosystem-based adaptation?
Well, at UNEP, and I think many other places, we often think about those challenges or those barriers that we face in three broad categories. Those basically relate to challenges related to knowledge and information, challenges related to governance, and challenges relating to finance. And I can say a little bit about each of them. In terms of knowledge, there's often a real lack of awareness of what ecosystem-based adaptation is and what it can do. There's a lot of misunderstanding of terms or dressing up old terms. And basically EBA for us is the same thing as when nature-based solutions are applied for adaptation purposes. So when ecosystems are protected or restored specifically for the purpose of giving an adaptation benefit to human communities. And adaptation is basically the same thing as increasing your resilience to the impacts of climate change. So it could be protecting a forest for its water or food supplies. It could be protecting mangroves or coral reefs for populations at the coast, protecting against saltwater intrusion, sea level rise, storm surges. That's EBA. EBA's been it's been a term that's been around for more than a decade. Since 2010, it's been part of UNEP's mandate and many other organizations. And we currently run 50 projects around the world that benefit 2.5 million people and restore 100,000 hectares. But that's just a drop in the bucket in terms of what EBA can and should be doing and how it can be scaled up. And so there's so much scope for scaling of EBA. And to do so, we know that we need to overcome those barriers. That first is really understanding, harnessing the power of nature, making the business case for nature, that nature has hard benefits and not just nice to have, not just protecting and hugging trees, but really you can put a monetary value on those services that nature and ecosystems provide. The second thing is overcoming barriers to governance around EBA. EBA needs to involve local communities, as Nate said. You have to involve those people who live in those ecosystems and benefit from them. You have to overcome barriers to that in order to scale up EBA. And the third is finance. As Carla mentioned, we really have to incentivize private sector and other actors to invest in EBA. And we need long-term sustainable solutions. EBA can't happen overnight. These need to be projects over a dozen years or more. And so how do you have those sustainable solutions in terms of finance? We recently, UNEP and ICN recently launched a new fund, Global EBA Fund, in April under ICI. It's a small grants, fast starts mechanism for overcoming exactly those three barriers to EBA. We launched it in April, had 300 applications. We just shortlisted our first 8. And it's really looking at innovative and catalytic actions for EBA. So really would welcome everyone who's interested to find out more. Our next call for applications is September 15th. And it's those kinds of funds, it's those kinds of financing mechanisms that I think are really exciting for us to see how we can scale up EBA finance.
If I could just add to that a little bit, is just to complement what Elizabeth has said, is really about that improving that understanding. I think we're getting a lot of, we're moving forward on that quite a bit. So of course, we're seeing initiatives like the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures gaining quite a lot of support. And we're working with, as co-hosts of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, on really building out a pipeline of risk-adjusted investable projects to attract financing into nature-based solutions. But as Elizabeth has highlighted, there's still a real lack of understanding of how investing in natural capital can provide that timely and productive return. And we do need to shift investment away, from more unsustainable projects by improving our enabling policies. So I think those are key bits. I think we are seeing movement, but the funds, like Elizabeth has mentioned, are still few and far between. So we do need to see a lot more investment in this space, but it's exciting to see at least going in the right direction.
And if I could just add to that, I think what's really important about the fund that Elizabeth has outlined is it's talking to providing the right type of capital for where the market is today. And I think that we all have a role as stakeholders in this space to manage expectations. The reality is that we've all drunk the Kool-Aid, right? We're already bought in. And sometimes we run the risk of perhaps overselling nature-based solutions and create this expectation that both Nate and Elizabeth have alluded to, that it's a silver bullet that we can pull the trigger on tomorrow. And that's not the case. Right, we need to develop a market, and we need to develop it responsibly. And I think to Nate's line around risk-adjusted returns, that's absolutely critical. It's around understanding these risks, and let's be clear, from a private financial sector perspective, the financial sector wants to do bankable deals. It's in our interest to do bankable deals, right? So it really becomes a definition of what do we mean, what does bankability require? And I think where the market is today is that we're really starting to feel each other out around what that bankability can be. I think it's also really important to mention subsidies. There was the Financing Nature report that came out last year, which highlighted that the biodiversity funding gap is, somewhere between, let's call it 700 billion a year. What their research pointed to is that we're looking at about $500 million of harmful subsidies. And when I say harmful to nature, how do we repurpose some of those subsidies so that we are incentivizing this change that we want to see? And in some cases, using that to de-risk the opportunity so that, to Nate's language, we have a risk-adjusted return that works for everyone.
Thank you. And Carla, perhaps what examples will help companies and organizations achieve positive water impacts?
So I think really also to complement what the others have said, we've heard some great examples already around regenerative agriculture or agroforestry, wetlands, as with water infiltration functions. And these examples are all great, and we have them deeply embedded in Danone's water policy, so really in the company strategy. And they will help us to achieve these positive water impacts locally. But I think that it's really not about these individual examples, because the progress is just too slow at the moment. And what we really require is this shifted approach that the other speakers have already mentioned, that we need bankability of projects. And we have some projects that have achieved some of the benefits, not just around water, but also carbon, biodiversity, socioeconomics. But it's we really need more cases that demonstrate this return on investment that these projects can have. And as we've just heard, the bankability aspect around it is really intransparent. We all know that investing in nature-based solutions can have a positive return on investment together with all these multiple great benefits, but it's still very, very hard for us in the private sector and for all these stakeholders that we work with to really build very clear business cases. And I think for that, we really have to work increasingly with the financing community, understanding what the investment criteria is, just getting really much more transparency around this process. And funds like that are great, that Elizabeth has mentioned, but we still find it hard to approach them. We don't working in the water stewardship sector is just really shows me day by day that the willingness is there, but how to scale up these actions concretely is just very intransparent and not really clear to us. And I think there are some really great ambitions for companies of becoming and driving this water impact positive notion, and that's also working on a pre-competitive basis. But that just again highlights that we don't have to work just with the financing community, but also with all the other global corporates that have so many pooled resources, financial, but also expertise, and really, really scale up these activities to build very clear bankable business cases of nature-based solutions in pilot project as technical assistant, starting with small grants, but then really being able to demonstrate the return on investment to scale them up as we so urgently need today.
And I think Carla raises a really important point around this idea of valuation, right? And it's we know that there are a number of initiatives working on how do we value this stuff better. I think that we've also got to be careful we don't let, and I'm stealing a line from someone else here, but we don't let perfect be the enemy of progress or good. And, sometimes we want this perfect valuation system. I would argue that when the tech industry looks at how to, depreciate the value of software for accounting purposes and tax purposes, it's not perfect, right? That there is just some assumptions and, okay, that's what we're going with. And we need to be comfortable as a community of taking that approach as well, so we don't get too caught up on it being perfect.
I think you just raised a really good point about being comfortable as a community, and you also talked about the converted and preaching to the choir. There are some organizations like the one I work for, right, or the one Nate works for. We're sort of, or see ourselves often as the good guys trying to do the right thing with very little money, right? And then sometimes there's a feeling that the private sector or those other actors out there kind of just want profit, don't care about doing the right thing. They might be greenwashing, right? And so we've often been really reluctant and nervous. How do we engage? How do we speak the same language? How do we measure these things so that we really can be on the same page? And so it's extremely exciting, and not just to have conversations like this where we're able to talk to each other, but also to see these innovative financing mechanisms, and there are many out there that are really trying to pilot projects that can really be scaled up, and exactly looking at that return on investment and looking at that de-risking, for example, of investments to nature. And I think that's a great start. We've seen so much action in this area over the last few years, and it's really positive for someone like me to see that.
Yeah. And I might just add, Liz, we are terrified of greenwashing as well. And the reality is that that sometimes perhaps creates the optics that we're slow moving, but we're terrified of greenwashing, right? And I think that this is where all the stakeholders probably can come together and be a lot more transparent about the expectations of each stakeholder group, right? We're not scientists. We're looking to the scientific community to guide us. And Nate, you touched on this being driven by science, and that's critical for us, right? We don't want to be throwing darts at a dartboard, or even worse, allocating money to people who are throwing darts at a dartboard. So I think that greenwashing piece is actually something potentially that can drive us closer together.
And if I can also just add to that, I think it's completely true and important to be very critical also from your side, Elizabeth, because the private sector has done in the past a lot of actions that make it clear that you should be critical, and this will drive the change. That's what I think. So we have to be critical and transparent, but then collaborate, because as I've said, there's so many resources and so much expertise also in the private sector that can really, really facilitate this transition at a much faster pace than we would if we wouldn't be working together.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time for this panel. It's been a really stimulating discussion. Perhaps we can just close out with very brief closing thoughts from each of you, 30 seconds or less, please. Starting with you, Nate, please.
Thanks. So I think when we're thinking about driving innovation in this space, we have to remember that risk is different in different contexts. And in places where there are no support system, risk makes and keeps people poor, and climate risk is destabilizing. So we need to be able to support that. Recognizing the role of legitimate grassroots organizations is key, especially in these times of disinformation. So we need their support as key knowledge brokers. And then also the importance of adaptive learning, really learning and tailoring management strategies accordingly, and moving away from that top-down approaches and short-term cycles are really key to building resilience on the ground. Those would be my 3 points. Thank you.
Liz?
Yeah, for me, I would say 2 main messages or takeaways for me is one, really finding ways to incentivize that working together, that innovation and catalytic activity with new partners, new actors, through funds that we're seeing come up now. That's one of the key aspects, is just building that pipeline to that kind of funding where we can work together. But the second one for me is really having conversations like this, being able to bring different actors, stakeholders together to talk about what innovation looks like, to talk about those incentives and put them right out front. There's absolutely nothing wrong with making money or wanting to see a return on investment, and I think we can do it for the right reasons and get a lot more people working in the right direction. So this sharing of knowledge and information like this is absolutely essential. Thanks for this conversation.
Oliver?
Just building off what Nate said, I think that we've got to acknowledge that there's a macro and a micro lens that we've got to apply here, and I think that in trying to sell nature-based solutions as the silver bullet, we really drive that at a macro level and perhaps run the risk of overselling it sometimes. And we've got to be responsible in that we have a lot of doubters. Again, if you're listening to this, you're part of this discussion, you're already bought in, but we don't want to give ammunition to the doubters that we have failed or underperformed. So I think we've got to be careful there. And then just to reinforce what Nate said, as a South African from the global South, context-specific solutions are just absolutely vital. And getting away from this perception that there is some magical deal out there that will absorb billions of dollars and just be one giant nature-based solution. I mean, that's the Earth, basically. We have to solve for these things at a granular level.
And the last word to Carla.
So I also have 3 takeaways from this conversation that I think are really important. So if we talk the whole time about water impact positive, I think we need to know what this actually means. So I think we need, firstly, a standardized methodology. And as we've heard, we need to base this on science, and we need a really robust process for quantifying the benefits and the impacts that we're having. And for that, my second takeaway would be working together, as we've said, collaborating with public, private, financing, civil society, with all different stakeholder groups, and working on this pre-competitive basis, because I think the ambition from the private sector is really there. They really want to act, but they need partners, and they need to know how. And that brings me to the third takeaway, which I think is that we increasingly need to build capabilities and skills, also within the private sector, but also in other organizations. We need to know how to actually implement water stewardship practices. So we really have to train people locally on the ground, the people that are going to implement the projects that we need.
Well, I've certainly heard some excellent insights in this episode, and I think we found some common ground. So thank you all for joining us here on the second episode of the Leadership in Business Accelerator. Tomorrow, we'll be joined by AB InBev, Blue Risk, Facebook, and Emerald Technology Ventures to discuss how to leverage 21st century innovations in data and technology towards a net positive water goal. So please join us tomorrow, same time, same place. See you then.